Now, I kind of summarize it into two major types of testimonies. You got the testimony of God's saving power. Those are the kind of the dramatic testimonies. If you know my boss, Pastor Doug Batchelor, you got the caveman story. You've got so many other incredible testimonies of just this miraculous saving story. People like those kind of stories. That's the kind of stories that people often make movies about. I'm trying to get Pastor Doug to make a movie about his story. But anyway, but then you got the testimony of God's keeping grace, right? God's saving grace, God's keeping grace. Now, is that a less kind of a testimony? I don't believe so. I believe that the testimony of God's keeping grace is just as important. Why? Because everybody who's ever saved needs to be kept. And if you're going to make it to heaven, you got to have both. We're going to all have a testimony of God's saving grace and God's keeping grace. Now, I actually think this testimony of God's keeping grace may just be a little bit better. I'll tell you why. Because I've met people who are in the church after 70 years, maybe 50 years in the church, and they're still in the church. Now, we are living in a pretty crazy world, and if you're still in the Seventh-day Adventist Church today, after all the things going on and the influence of the world, the influence of college, the influence of the media, influence of everybody, the devil's working triple time to try to get everybody away from Jesus, right? And away from the truth. And so, if the fact that you're still in the church, I just say, wow. Now that I've become a Christian and a Seventh-day Adventist Christian, I want to know, how do I stay? So what kind of testimony am I looking for? The keeping testimony. How is it that especially for young people who've been through college perhaps and they're still in the church, you're like, what? You're exception to the rule, right? Tell me how you did it. Because now that I'm a Christian, I'm a Seventh-day Adventist Christian, I want to stay. I want to abide. That's what he just read there in John chapter 8. If you abide in my word, I want to stay in God's word. And so I just want to encourage you. You have a testimony. No matter if it's, I don't have a testimony. I don't have anything dramatic to tell. If you're still in God's church, you have a story to tell. And not just that, but you have somebody, or likely somebodies, who need to hear your testimony. If you have it, and so if you know Jesus, somebody needs to hear about how you come to know Jesus and why you still know Jesus, right? So I just like to start off my testimony by saying that. My testimony is a little bit kind of more of a wild story. Some of you guys already know it. I see some familiar faces out there. For those of you who haven't heard my testimony today, you know it. She's probably heard my testimony 100 times. You know a few people? Was that Brent and Carla back there? Yeah? Okay. This is my family's up front here. Y'all get introduced to them a little bit later perhaps, but my wife's probably feeding the baby, and anyway. Okay, so I'm going to get started. Before we're going to have an opening prayer in just a minute, but I do want to share. There we go. I give away a copy of my book every time I share my testimony. It's a book that gives the more details. My question, but who gets it, right? That's the hard thing. So I decided most of my story kind of revolves around my time when I was about 15 years old. So I like to find somebody in the room that's about 15 years old. Is there any 15-year-old kid in here? Any 15-year-old? Any? Who? Oh, he's not here. Well, he just is out. He's got to get it another way. I was going to ask next, who's close to 15, like 15, 14 or 16? I got a 14-year-old. Any others? Oh, you're 14? You're 16. All right, okay. Here's the drawing question, okay? I do this in all my seminars, so if you ever come to my seminar, you're going to know it. The person who sits closest to the front always wins. Hey, you can see empty pews up here. No preacher likes empty pews. So this is my incentive in the future, sit closer to the front. I'm going to give it to this brother right here, but we'll make sure you get a copy if you need one, okay? Purity, would you go give him that back there? The gentleman in the red sweater right there. All right. If you want me to personalize that for you later, I'd be glad to do that. All right, well, you guys ready to get started? Quick question. Here's a little poll. She said they took away some things to give me some more time. Do you want the short version or a long version? I can get a short version and be done within, get you guys to lunch, or I can give you about an hour version. Who wants? Wow, you know where she's at. Who wants the short version? Who wants the longer version? All right, I'll try not to keep you too long. But let's go ahead and bow your heads again. Let's pray. Father in heaven, you are wonderful. and we praise your name. Today as I share, O Lord, speak through these lips. Today as I share, Lord, speak to our hearts. Help us to recognize that you are the God who saves, and you can save to the uttermost. We praise your name. In Jesus' precious name, amen. I call my testimony Free Indeed, my story of true freedom. And I'm going to begin by sharing from God's Word, somebody else's testimony, not mine, but somebody else's. John chapter 8, you know the story. The woman, early in the morning, Jesus is there in the temple, he's teaching, and this woman is just drugged right to his feet. She is caught in adultery. And now they're accusing her. Jesus, they're trying to trap him, of course. Moses says she ought to die. What do you say? And Jesus is wise, wisdom from God. He begins to get down and write in the dust. You guys know the story. Eventually he writes in the dust again. Then he calls the woman, or calls the people. He says, he who is without sin, let him throw the first stone, right? And then he goes back down to writing again, and as he looks up again, everybody's gone. And Jesus asks the pivotal question. He says, woman, where are your accusers? Has no one condemned you? She says, no, Lord. They're all gone. And Jesus says the most powerful words that I pray has meant something to you, or maybe will mean something to you today. Neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more. Now I want you just to picture for a moment that woman. As she is there, she's probably, not dressed very well, and she's probably got tears running down her face. She's just completely disheveled. And as she's there, she's being accused. She knows, if she knows anything about Jesus and his reputation, she knows that he is a pure, holy person. She knows if anybody had a right to throw a stone, it was him, right? And she wasn't expecting him to contradict Moses. And Moses, according to him, they made it very clear on the way, she deserved to die. It's almost as if she had the lethal injection needle in her arm. That's how close she was to death. Can you imagine her feeling of guilt and shame just piled on her, and she's just wanting to be what? Free. She wanted to be anywhere else in the whole world except right there at that moment. She wanted to be free. She wanted to be liberated from the guilt, the shame, the accusations. Now, there's a lot more that can be said about that story, but one thing's for sure. When she got up, when Jesus said, neither do I condemn you, she was free. She was set free. And I tell you, on an Independence Day, we could talk about independence from the British. The British ain't got nothing on Satan and sin. Well, that's what we need to be set free from, and not just back in 1776, but in 2020. Because Satan and sin and self are alive and well, and we must be set free on a daily basis. I'm going to share with you guys my story of freedom, of how I went from basically captivity, and I'm not talking metaphorical either, from captivity to freedom. To actually standing before you here today, I'm going to share my personal testimony, and it is personal. I realize all of us have different experiences, and some of you may be able to relate to it. Some of you can't understand it, and that's okay. But pray for me as I preach, as I share, because as many times as I share this, I'll tell you something. God's richness, God's goodness is still just as alive today as it ever has, and it still touches my heart. So may it touch your heart as well. I'm going to take you back. Before I do that, I'm going to share, can you think of anybody in the Bible who was in prison? Anybody in the Bible? Joseph was in prison. Peter was in prison. Paul spent his time. Silas, right? Who else? John the Baptist. He went in and he didn't even get out. He lost his head inside. Jeremiah. He actually his prison was a pit. What about anybody else? You ever thought about Jesus? He may not have spent time in it. Actually, when I went to Israel a couple years back, and I went down to a place where he was likely held in this jail cell. It was way down because, they built Jerusalem on top of Jerusalem on top of Jerusalem. So you have to kind of go way down to find the original streets and stuff. But there's this old jail, this old room down there where Jesus was likely arrested and held for a while. And so Jesus himself. But the interesting thing about those men that you've listed, they didn't do anything. They're innocent, right? These are people who didn't go to prison because, they're criminals. They went to prison because they were righteous. But what about the criminals? What about the thief on the cross? Or the other guy too? What about Barabbas, the guy who got set free, who was supposed to die on the cross that Jesus died on? Does God love those people too? I love the idea of Barabbas. Here, Jesus takes his place on the cross in a very literal way. And you and I are Barabbas. And I can relate to Barabbas. I don't know what he did with his life. I wish I had some inspiration of just what happened with Barabbas and his future life. But I don't know. We'll find out soon enough. But I'll tell you, I didn't grow up to go to jail, go to prison, but that's exactly where I went. And, you remember when you were kids, maybe in school, you had the yearbooks and talked about who most likely to succeed and most likely to, be president or whatever. I don't know. Mine didn't say most likely to go to prison, but it very well could have, because I was getting into a lot of trouble as a young person. I want to take you back to my very first day locked up. Or not first day locked up, but first day in the penitentiary, actually into prison. And I remember as I was leaving the county jail, they put these handcuffs on my wrists, they put the cuffs around my ankles, they put a belly chain around my belly, and they cuffed it all together with the ankle chain leading up to my waist, and we're shuffling like this all the way onto the bus, and then all the way, this 3-hour bus ride, not too far from here. I was in Springfield, Missouri, and they sent me on a bus ride all the way up to Fulton, Missouri. And I remember the whole bus ride just thinking about all the stories I had heard in jail about what prison was going to be like. They said the first thing you do when you get to prison, they say you sharpen a toothbrush and you carry it with you. You get the idea. They say you find the biggest guy around and you knock him down to show him who's in charge. All these advice that I got. But one thing had happened at that point. I was already a Christian. I had already given my life to Jesus at this point. I'll tell you how I got there later on. But I remember on this day, we finally got to the prison. We went through this big gate, opened up, it closed behind us. Another gate opened up, closed behind us. And as we got inside, I was now officially in prison. They got us off the bus. They ushered us into a big old room. In this big room was not just one bus, my bus full of inmates, but about 4 or 5 other buses full of inmates, all ushered in this one room. And then they were told us to strip down. So there we all were, naked, in this big room. Now, let me tell you, I was 17 years old. I was the youngest person in that room that day. I had to be, because everybody else had a mustache, a goatee, Fu Manchu, beard, something. I had nothing. I had 3 whiskers. I couldn't even tie them together because they were too far apart. I had nothing. It was bare face, and I was this kid. And so you can imagine, you think I had a little terror in my heart, a little bit of fear? There was one thing I wanted more than anything else. I want to be free. I did not want to be there. Just like that woman caught in adultery, I did not want to be there at that moment. I wanted to be out of there. I wanted to be free. I wanted to be back with my family. I wanted to be back with my friends. I wanted to be out of there. That day, we went through the process where finally, after like 2 hours of standing around kind of awkwardly, not making eye contact, and not, everybody else had these big old tattoos and everything, and I had like 3 tattoos, 2 faded, one of them I cut out. I'll tell you about that story another time. And but I didn't have any tattoos, and I tell you what, when my name was called, I was like, yes. They called me over. They sprayed us down with bug spray because you don't want to enter the prison with any kind of lice or anything. So they spray you down. You stand there for a while, finally get the shower off. They say, go pick your clothes out. So I went through this bin trying to find clothes that fit me. Even then, I was 17. I was probably about 6'1" or so, 6'2". I was a little tall kid. And so looking for clothes and shoes that fit. And then they gave me this little plaque. And on this little plaque, they said, this is your new name. And it said 1036878. That was my new name. I got a mugshot picture with that, and they printed me out a little ID card. It was pink. Can you believe that? It was a pink ID card, and we carried this thing around. They said, go get your blanket and your sheets and go on to your cell. And I had to go out. And here's the thing. I was walking down the prison yard. Guess what? There was no guards anywhere to be seen. Just a lot of inmates. I'm going to find this housing unit 2. The housing unit 2 was reserved for the inmates that had 20 years or more of prison time to serve. These were the hardened criminals. The guy that was bunking right above me, he had 7 life prison sentences. These were in there for people in there for murder, for rape, for assaults, arson, all kinds of crimes you can imagine. Everybody was in there for just crazy stuff, and everybody's trying to act as tough as they can be because this was the penitentiary. I wanted to be free. I yearned to be free. I wanted so bad to get out of that place. And so, anyway, that was my experience there. Sorry about the delay here on the clicking. Let's see. There it is. There it is. So, like I said, I wasn't raised to go to prison. Now, I will tell you this. I did have kind of a rough upbringing. Some of you can relate to that. Divided home. My parents met when I was young. My grandmother, she was not the best grandmother, doing drugs and various different things. My dad was a drug dealer. So my mom came into the picture. She was 15 years old. She ended up marrying my dad. He just got back from the military. He was in the Marines. And so then a couple years later, my brother was born. My mom was 19. I was the second born. My mom was 21. She had her third child. And this was the home I was raised in. It was a crazy upbringing. My parents divorced. I think I was 3 or 4. My dad was very abusive to my mom, beat her up all the time, hurt her bad. She tried to escape a few times. He tried to kill her once and ended up going to prison for that. But every time he was locked up, he would get back out and say, "I'm so sorry," and I found Jesus and all this stuff. And guess what? Went back to the womanizing, went back to the drugs, went back to the alcohol. Nothing was changed. And so my mom said, "I'm getting out of here." In the middle of the night, she stole our neighbor's car. Actually, it was the landlord's car. And she put all of his kids in it and took off, found a women's shelter, and was able to find some refuge. And finally got away. And so she tried to raise us kids away from my dad. Finally, though, my dad started sobering up. Here's a picture of my mom, by the way. And this is Jefferson City, Missouri. That's where she ended up settling down. That's me there. You can see I'm the one pinching my sister. I don't know how. This is back in the days when you didn't take 100 pictures because you had the actual film. But they got the good one, me, the evidence. And then that's my brother Dustin. He's 2 years older. She's 3 years younger. And that's my mama. And so she tried to raise us there. And then when I was about 6 years old, my dad got partial custody back. So I was kind of back and forth. He's around Rolla, Missouri. So this is my life growing up. My dad, he may have sobered up, but he didn't lose his violence. He still is a very violent person. And he actually put my mom in the hospital for a few months while my family, we spent our time in a foster home. While my dad was in trouble, my mom was in the hospital. We were working through that. In fact, that was my first exposure to Christianity. The foster parents I had, you'd think, "Oh, this is great. He's going to be exposed to Christianity." Because I wasn't raised in the church. My mom had her episodes going back and forth, but it wasn't anything that I remember or made any difference in my life. I remember some of the crafts that said Jesus, with popsicle sticks. That's it. But I remember going to this foster home, and they took us to church every single Sunday. And every Sunday, it was the worst day of the week. It was bad enough having some of the rules at home, but the rules at church were even tougher. And it was like a military boot camp. It was the worst experience I can remember having at that young age. And I just remember, if this is what Christians are like, I want nothing to do with it. And I didn't. I didn't really have anything to do with Christianity for a very long time. I was a pretty. My mom said I was a good kid. But the evidence kind of proves otherwise. My brother and I burned down a house. I was 6, he was 8. 2 firefighters were hurt in that. My mom lost custody of us kids, not technically custody. We became wards of the state, basically, during that time. And then, vandalizing, stealing from stores, all this time growing up. And this is the experience that I had in my family. It was just a lot of turmoil. Well, when I was with my dad, he was a hard worker. And if I learned anything from my dad, it was a lot of hard work. And he owned a restaurant. He bought a restaurant. He was also a carpenter. And so he had some money coming in, more than my mom had. My mom worked three jobs just to keep us on the good side of town, right? My dad, he got this, he had some money. So he bought this big satellite. It's cheaper than a babysitter. So he got this big satellite. Back in the days when the satellites would move around to get a different satellite. So he got one of these big satellites. And we had everything on TV we could ever imagine watching. And we had the cartoon stuff. We had the HBO and the Showtime and the Cinemax. You know what they show on Cinemax? What they do on Cinemax? They sin to the max. It's really bad stuff. And this is, as kids, my family, we were watching these things with no filters. We were being very, very disobedient and learning terrible, terrible things, you can imagine. And so I watched television a lot as a kid, played video games a lot as a kid. One redeeming virtue I had is that I liked to read. I had an older brother. My dad married my stepmom. He was a good kid. He's a highway patrolman today. He's like the only one who doesn't have a felony. But he's, but he liked to read, and so he kind of rubbed off on me. Older siblings, keep that in mind. You will rub off on your younger siblings. So I read a lot, but the books I read was not the best. I read a lot of fantasy books. I read a lot of, played a lot of games like Dungeons and Dragons, Magic the Gathering. This is a book. I was reading a lot of fantasy books. When my brother read this book, he gave it to me. He said, "You're going to like this one." So I read this book about magic. And I'm like, wow, this isn't like some fairy tale, pretend, fake story. No, this is supposed to be real magic. So I read this book, and it says you can do these things. And so I started playing around and dabbling in witchcraft. And before long, based on the things I was seeing and experiencing, I said, this stuff is powerful. This stuff is real. And so I started dabbling in it more and more. About the same time, I discovered my dad's stash of pot, and I began using that. And in fact, he had so much of it, he never noticed me taking it. And I took so much of it that, all of a sudden I became popular. As long as I had my stuff, they liked me. If I didn't have it, so what? I didn't get invited to parties. But when I had my dad's, weed, all of a sudden I was the best friend of everybody. And so I started getting invited to parties. And I'm dabbling witchcraft, going to parties, getting high, sneaking out. I eventually snuck out so many times that one time I came back home, and this was back in Jefferson City with my mom, the lights were on in my bedroom. What's that mean? I'm busted, right? I'm caught. This is like 2 o'clock in the morning. And I said to myself, well, I could go back and I could get, browbeated by my mom. And let me tell you, my mom loved me. She cared about me. But she also was no nonsense. And I knew that I was going to be in big trouble. So I said, you know what? I'm just not going back home. I'm going to go back to the party. In fact, I'm going to go to the next party for the next 2 weeks. And I'd be going from house to house, and I did this like 2 or 3 different times where I'd just stay out. Well, one time I stayed out so long, my mom, she put out this missing poster, or she was trying to find me. She was scared. She was worried. By the way, when you live for self and all you're thinking about is yourself, do you realize you hurt people? Can you imagine what my mom was going through? I'm about 14, 15 years old during this time. And I am breaking my mom's heart. But I didn't care. Because when you're selfish, you don't care about anybody but yourself. And you're hurting people. I think, who was it? John Donne has said, no man is an island unto himself. Well, that was my experience. I thought I was all just me. And that's what witchcraft taught me. In fact, witchcraft was telling me that it's like there's a thing in witchcraft called the Wiccan Rede, and it says basically, do as you will, harm ye none. Basically, don't hurt anybody, but do whatever you want otherwise. And that's kind of what I lived by until one night I was partying so hard, I got caught. By the police. We were running from the police. Anyway, I eventually got away and went into this club for teenagers where they had heavy metal music, but they didn't have alcohol, so we can get in there. And went in this place, and I sat down next to this guy who was a Satanist. And he asked me if I ever heard about Satan or Satanism, and so I told him, I acted like I knew more than I did. And he said, well, and he basically, I was high on drugs, and he said, look, let's go through this ritual, and I'll make sure the cops never get you. Okay? And so we went through this ritual. We went through this, and we cast some spells and this various different stuff, calling out to Satan. I was literally praying to Lucifer. How do I know? Because I was using words like Lucifer and Satan and Beelzebub and Mephistopheles and other names that are used of Satan. Azazel, which we know the Bible actually uses for Satan. And so I'm calling out to the devil for help. And all of a sudden, I'm going to say miraculously in this very satanic way, I wasn't high anymore. I wasn't fearful anymore. And I went and partied like crazy. And I went and bought my own satanic Bible. Began to read the Satanic Bible and consider myself a Satanist. I couldn't officially join the Satanic Church because you got to be 18 and pay $200. I wasn't 18 and I didn't have $200. But I started hanging out with this new crowd, partying harder than ever, kept committing more crimes, until finally I was arrested after one of these times of running away. And they said, you know what, Wyatt? You've got a drug problem. I was thinking to myself, to the judge, I said, in my heart, I said, my only drug problem is the fact you took away my drugs. I didn't want to, I just wanted to go back to the party. That's all I wanted to do. But they had arrested me so many times before. But this time, they're not going to let me out. They're going to send me to drug rehab. Purity, turn around, sit down. Yep, sorry. Have to do some parenting up here. So they sent me to drug rehab. I said, okay, it's like a 2.5 month program. I said, I can make it through this. I can play the game long enough. I can act good enough. I can finally get out of here. But you know what happened? A couple weeks into the program, started stealing cigarettes, stealing matches, sneaking cigarettes here and there. Finally, one day, I was caught smoking, and the guy that caught me, he's the one who took away my Satanic Bible. He would not let me have the Satanic Bible in the program, right? So I'm already angry at this guy. He's had me out there mowing lawns and doing work, torturing me with working. Can you imagine that? I'm being facetious there for those that, work is not a bad thing. I thought it was a bad thing. And so during that time, I was just so angry at this guy. And after he caught me smoking, I begged him. I said, you don't have to report this. You can, just let it go. He said, no, I got to report it. So he reported it, which means I was probably going to get kicked out of the program, and I was arrested for drug possessions and assaults and burglaries and all these different things. They said all these things are going to come back, and you're going to end up serving time till you're 21 if you don't make it through this drug rehab program. So now that I'm caught smoking, I'm thinking I got nothing to lose, and I determined in my heart this guy that caught me is not going to live. So I was able to sneak into the kitchen. I got a knife. I came, and I attacked that man. And I hurt him so bad that when the ambulance came, they carried him away on a stretcher. The paddy wagon came, they carried me away to juvenile detention center. I don't know if the guy lived or died. I was trying to kill him, and I thought I had succeeded. Found out a few days later they charged me with assault and not murder, so I guess that was a relief to me to some degree. But at the same time, I was locked up in the juvenile detention center. I had no desire to live. I had no desire to stay on this earth. I didn't have any friends for real. Everybody, they were all fake friends, right? I didn't have hope. All my teachers at school told me, all my science teachers told me that I'm just an evolutionary accident. I have no purpose in life. There's no reason for you to be here. You're just a chance random act. And so I had no purpose in life. And so I didn't have any desire to live whatsoever. Plus, I was just depressed. I was full of hate. I was full of anger. I was full of loneliness. I didn't want to live. But there was one thing that happened. This is kind of where the story starts changing. My mom, I get to talk to her once a week. We had a 10-minute phone call every Friday. Well, actually, it was every other Friday because I got to talk to my dad one Friday, my mom the next Friday, and back and forth. And I lied to them. I told them both. I said, I'm not guilty. Somebody else did it, whatever. There's no way I'm going to get away with it. But But my parents believed me. And parents want to believe their kids, right? Well, my mom asked me, she said, son, well, do they have any, you got a lot of time in your cell. Do you have any Bibles in there? Well, I'm in the juvenile detention center, and this is actually a picture of the facility in Springfield, Missouri, where I was at. And you can look at, this is, from this perspective, I'm actually sitting where the phone is, looking at this bookshelf. And this is the bookshelf that I was able to get a lot of. I was reading about 2 books a day. You're allowed to have 2 books in your cell. And I was reading about 2 books a day because I was locked down about 23 hours a day. We got out, during the weekdays, we got out for lunch, about 30 minutes. And then we got out every day about 30 minutes for recreation. And then later on, we got a few more privileges and got out a little bit longer. But at first, it was just like 23 hours a day lockdown. And I'll tell you what, I read and I read. And I read like every book on this shelf, every book on that shelf, every book on that shelf. But I'm staying away from this shelf up here. That's where all the Bibles were. Do they have any Bibles in there, my mom asked? I could look across the shelf and I said, yeah, Mom, they have Bibles. Well, why don't you pick one up and read it? And I don't remember exactly what I said, but I just, kind of dismissed it and whatever, Well, for the next, it had to have been maybe week and a half. I'm walking past, my cell is right around this corner here. That's where my cell is. And I'm walking past it week after, or day after day after day, back and forth from recreation, back and forth from my shower, back and forth from the chow hall. And every time I walk past that bookshelf, you know what's looking at me? That Bible isn't just looking at me, it's staring at me. That Bible is staring me down. And every time I walk by it, I'm thinking to myself, maybe I should read it. But I'm a Satanist, right? I read the Satanic Bible. You know what the Satanic Bible said? That the Christian Bible is riddled full of contradictions and errors. So I said, okay, here's my plan. I'm going to go grab the Bible off the shelf. I'm going to take it back to my cell. Remember, you're allowed to have 2 books. I'm going to read through it. It's not that big of a book. I can read through it. I've read books that big. And I'm going to read through that book, and I'm going to find all the contradictions. I'm going to find all the errors. I'm going to put Christians in their place. All right? So one day, I'm going by it. I'm kind of browsing through the bookshelf, getting ready to grab my book, and nobody's really looking at me because I kind of had a reputation to uphold. So I kind of reached up, and I grabbed a Bible, put it up underneath my other book, and I took it back to my cell. I was surprised it didn't burn me. Took it back. Now, I'm serious, though. I had thought maybe I touched it before I grabbed it, you know. And that's a true story. And so I took the Bible back to my cell, and where do you begin reading the book? At the beginning. Nobody said, you begin and read the book of John. That would have saved me some time. But I began the book began the Bible in the book of Genesis. That was where I started reading the Bible. Now, as I read, it's a lot of stories that you just take for granted. You know the 6 days of creation, the 7th day of rest. You guys know the story of Adam and Eve and Cain and Abel. I had never heard any of these stories in my life. Now, every once in a while in the Bible, there were some stories it was faintly familiar, like David and Goliath and such. But most of the stories I had never heard before. The Tower of Babel, the global flood, all that. And then, actually, I had heard about the global flood because I watched some documentary on the History Channel a long time ago. But anyway, then there was, you go on through the book of Genesis and you read the story of Abraham, and then you get to the story of Joseph, which was really cool for me because Joseph, this is a guy who, where'd he go? He went to prison. And so I'm like, I can relate to this guy a little bit, but actually I can relate more to his brothers because his brothers are the one who put him into prison. They first of all threw him in the pit, and then they sold him into slavery, and then he went to prison. So I'm thinking, you know what? I'm more like the brothers than I am like Joseph. I'm the one trying to hurt innocent people here. And so I'm continuing reading through the Bible, and it's really interesting because I'm not believing the stories, but I'm also not finding the contradictions that I'm looking for. But instead I'm finding this, and I'm a big story fan. I was addicted to movies and video games and all kinds of, anything that had a story, I was involved in it. And so when I'm reading this story through, I'm like, okay, this is like the fantasy stories I've read before, right? I'm not really believing them, but it's kind of an interesting, intriguing story, especially like with the story of Joseph. You get right to the very end, and it's like a plot twist. The Bible has everything. It has drama. It has action. The Bible has mystery. The Bible has these romance, right? Does it have romance? Read Song of Solomon. I was like, what does that do in the Bible? And then there's all these different stories, different genres. But I'm reading the story, and Joseph, all of a sudden, at the very end of the story, it's like, what you intended for evil, God has intended for good. I'm like, wow, that's deep. I didn't see that one coming. And then, of course, then you get to the book of Exodus. And then there's like blood being thrown around everywhere. And I'm like, sacrifices. And this is totally weirding me out. And I keep on reading through Exodus. Leviticus was even tougher. And then, of course, the Exodus, the flood story. Actually, I had kind of remembered the whole, let my people go story, And so I had heard that before. But I read through but I had never made the connection that this is like all Bible. I'm getting to Leviticus and Numbers and the talking donkey. And I'm like, okay, this is completely unbelievable. But it's a really interesting read. Then Deuteronomy, and then I got into, of course, Joshua was really a neat story with the sun standing still and Judges and all the different miracles that happened there. And I finally met Samson and Delilah. Now, I'd heard that story before. I think my mom had like a cartoon show while we watched or something. She would show us on TV where like the cartoon version of these stories. But again, of all my history, I never knew anything about the gospel. I just heard these stories. So I'm keep reading through, and I finally come to the story of David. You guys know David? Oh, David. Now that's an adventure story for you if there ever was one. And David's story is pretty awesome. He of course he's a shepherd boy. He's anointed as a king, but he was kind of a secret thing. And then he goes, he kills a bear, he kills a lion, he kills a giant. And next thing you know, he's playing the harp for, the guy's multi-talented, he plays the harp for the king. And then this king's getting out of his mind, out of control, trying to kill David. throwing spears and stuff. I'm like, that's me. I'm Saul. I'm like relating to this Saul guy because he's like, one day he's making sense and thinking straight. The next day he's out of his mind, all wild and crazy. I'm like, yep, that's me. I mean, I've been diagnosed with all kinds of, psychological disorders, manic depressive and ADHD and bipolar. Was that manic depressive bipolar? Anyway, they had me on all these medications and all these drugs, and I'm like, you know what? I need me a heart player. And so David, but David, he's a man after God's own heart. This guy's, he's trying to do good to Saul. He's trying to help Saul out. This guy is a good guy. And so, of course, the day comes that, Saul has slain his thousands, but David, his tens of thousands. And Saul's jealousy gets too much, and he says, okay, I'm going to get this guy. He chases after him. David's now on the run. And he runs, and Saul falls and follows, until finally one day, Saul's trying to kill David, and he traps him. He basically gets down there, going down into the Dead Sea. Down by the Dead Sea, there's this little valley that goes through there, or this little stream, and on the other side of that valley are these caves. It's called En-Gedi. And in these caves is, there's so many different caves down there, and David, he says, he gets this little band of mighty soldiers, and he says, let's go hide in this cave. And so they all go in the back of this cave, and they're hiding. Shh. And here comes the army, so loud, right? Coming on down through there, and Dave's heart, just beating out of his chest, I can imagine it. And as Saul's coming down through this valley, Saul says, stop, right at the cave door. I mean, he's like, stop. And Saul says, see that cave right there? I'm going to go use the bathroom. I'll be right back. And so Saul goes into the cave. King James Version says he went to cover his feet. You can kind of imagine how that works. And so he went in the cave. He's using the bathroom. And David, his right-hand guy, elbows him and says, hey, now's your chance. Now's the time to get him. I'm like, get him, get him. And David takes out his knife, and he sneaks up behind Saul. And as he raises that knife, instead of bringing it down into Saul, he cuts off a piece of his garment. And David's men are like, what are you doing? And David says, I'm not laying my hand on the Lord's anointed. I'm like, this guy's insane. So Saul finishes his business, gets out of the cave, goes back out at a distance. David, he comes up out of the cave, and Saul's army is at a distance. He says, Saul! He says, is that you, David? And David holds up a piece of cloth. And Saul looks at that cloth. He recognizes that that's part of his robe, right? He recognizes that's his. And in that moment, can you imagine what's going through Saul's heart? He realizes that he could have been killed by David, but David had something called mercy. Mercy. And Saul realizes that. He says, David, you've returned good for my evil. And that don't compute in a carnal mind. I want you to understand this. When you're not a believer, when you're not a follower of Jesus Christ, you look out for number one. You think about yourself. Looking out for somebody else or putting somebody else first is completely unnatural. When I was reading the Satanic Bible, it really pretty much mocks the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus says to turn the other cheek. Jesus says to feed your enemy. Love those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who despitefully use you. Well, the Satanic Bible turns it on end. And it says, no. We're here. We are our own gods. We're here to serve ourselves. If somebody smites you on the cheek, hit them harder on theirs. It says, why do you hate those, or why do you love those who hate you? Love those who love you. The Satanic Bible says, love those who love you. Sounds good, right? That's a satanic idea. Love those who love you. But rather, the gospel idea, Christ's idea is love those who hate you. That's not natural. That's not normal. That's supernatural. It takes divine grace to have that attitude. So when I'm seeing David have this mercy on Saul, I'm thinking, that's crazy. But from Saul's perspective, I'm like, that's great. And in that moment, that very day, reading that Bible verse, now it took, I don't know, maybe it was maybe a week into my reading of the Bible. I said to myself, I'm like Saul. I'm hurting innocent people, and yet the innocent person wants to have mercy. I want to have mercy. I want mercy. And all of a sudden, in that moment, it's like all the sins, all the wicked, all the dirt that I've done comes piling on my shoulders, and I'm just feeling this compulsion of just guilt and this shame in my life, just like that woman that we saw caught in adultery. It all come flooding back. I mean, I'm like, I'm a rascal. And I prayed this strange prayer. Now, I have to understand, you're not allowed to speak in the cell. I'm 15 years old at this time, and we're locked in this cell all by myself, and you're not allowed to talk. They got microphones in the room. So I'm praying this silent prayer. I'm saying, God, I don't know why you want me, but here I am. If you're willing to have me, please have mercy on me, and I'll be a follower of yours. And that's, because here, from the beginning, you have this God who's pursuing man, right? God who's chasing after humanity. And humanity is who's constantly, just fighting God. Like, what's up with that? And I realized God's been chasing me. Not to hurt me, but to save me. And so I'm like, all right, God, I won't fight it. Here I am. So I continue reading the Bible. And I read, by the way, I happened to go to En-Gedi there in Israel. And so you can see I got my blue cloth I held up, my royal robe I cut off of Saul, and holding it up. Those caves are pretty interesting back there. I don't know which cave was David's, but it was a very meaningful time in my life, reading that story. It's where my heart began to change. And literally, my heart was hard as a rock up to that point. I was laughing at these stories. I was mocking these Bible stories. I wasn't believing them one bit. But at this point, something miraculous happened. Now, I hope every one of you have found some point in your life where you can say, that's where I have a turning point. That's where God began to get a hold of me. Now, I wasn't converted yet. I was still, I was a heavy metal headbanger, that I loved my heavy metal music. I had, I still was, if you would have gave me a drug the next day, I probably would have started using drugs again. I had a lot of issues that still had to be worked through. But God began right there that day. And I kept reading through the Bible. What's crazy is I got to the story of this David, and David, now he becomes king. Saul ends up dying because he's talking to witches. Like, okay, that's a lesson. I better not, better stop consulting mediums, right? And spirits. And so no more spells for me. And so Saul ended up dying from that experience, and then now David is king. And David goes through some rough periods. He had sons that were rebellious, and Absalom, and my son, the story. And all these stories are touching my heart now because I'm starting to be open. I'm like, okay, this is for me. This is my story. This is a story for me. So I'm reading through there, and I finally come to the end of the story, end of David's life, where David's kind of a little bit older. He's kind of retired. Everybody else is going off to war, and he's staying home. He looks over, and who's he see? Sheba taking a bath. That's why they call her Bathsheba, right? I don't know. But Bathsheba, she's over there taking a bath, and he says, I can get her. So David commits adultery. He ends up covering it up with murder by killing her husband. I mean, you think you've seen some dramatic stuff on television. I mean, this stuff is like blockbuster stuff. And I'm drawn into it. I'm visualizing all this. I'm painting a picture. As I'm reading these stories, I'm thinking, David, this rascal, now this guy, this is the man after God's own heart. And I'm kind of shaking my head thinking, this is just like Christians, always so holier than thou and upright and self-righteous. And they say one thing and they do another. So I was a little disappointed in David. Well, anyway, I kept reading the story. No, this is really cool. So the story goes on. Nathan, the prophet, comes to David. You guys know the story, Nathan the prophet? Nathan comes to David. He says, David, let me tell you a story. He tells you a story about this man with like one little sheep, one little lamb, and David ends up, the man ends up having this one little lamb. It was like a kid to him. The neighbor kills it to have a feast or whatever. It was just a sad, sad story. And David, at the end of that story, he's like, that man has to die. And then Nathan looks at him and says, you're the man. Right? I mean, come on. You're the man. You're the one who's guilty. You're the one who deserves to die. And in that moment, David had his epiphany, his realization, his awakening, his coming to his senses. And finally, David's like, is there hope for me yet? He has a consequence. You guys know he had a consequence? His son from that relationship died, from that pregnancy. Sad story there. But I'm thankful the Bible I had a cross-reference, had a little footnote actually. It sent me over to Psalm 51. I want to take you there to Psalm 51. If you have a Bible, let's open it up. Psalm 51. I can't tell you my story without having you open the Bible at least once. Psalm 51. This is the psalm that David wrote after his heart was converted after this repentance experience, after this experience of conviction. And this is his repentance, okay? Psalm 51, I won't read all the verses here, but there's some powerful verses in this passage. Ready? Verse 1. It says, "Have mercy upon me, O God." What was I wanting? Mercy. This is what David's praying for. So all of a sudden, this prayer is becoming my prayer. "Have mercy upon me according to, O God, according to your loving kindness, according to the multitude of your tender mercies. Blot out my transgressions." I want that. "Wash me thoroughly from my iniquity and cleanse me from my sin. For I acknowledge my transgressions, and my sin is always before me. Against you only have I sinned and done this evil in your sight." Verse 7, "Purge me with hyssop, and I shall be clean. Wash me, and I will be whiter than snow." Verse 9, "Hide your face from my sins. Blot out my iniquities." Verse 10, "Create in me a clean heart, O God." That's what I wanted. A clean heart. Verse 14, "Deliver me from the guilt of bloodshed." The guilt of what? What did I get locked up for? Assault. Bloodshed. "Deliver me from the guilt of bloodshed, O God. The God of my salvation." By the way, the God of my salvation, that's the name Jesus there in Hebrew. "And my tongue shall sing aloud of your righteousness. O Lord, open my lips, and my mouth shall show forth your praise." Friends, when I was reading through that psalm, I think I had to read it just like 3 or 4 times. I don't even know how many times. My memory's kind of fuzzy about that, but I do remember it brought me to my knees. It brought me to tears. I'm crying out to God, "Please have mercy on me." And this is, my friends, where I believe my conversion took place. This is where God really got a hold of me, and He's showing me that I'm a worthless scoundrel of myself, but through Christ. Well, I didn't even know Christ yet. Who's Jesus? I hadn't had a clue at this point. But I knew that God loved me. I knew that God wanted to save me. I knew God wanted to change me. He didn't want me to be the same old foolish person I was. So I kept reading the Bible. I kept working through the stories. And I'll tell you, there's some miraculous, powerful stories in there. The story of Elijah, and then Elisha. The stories of more miracles. Now, before I wasn't believing the miracles. Now I'm believing the miracles. Now it's like, whoa, wow, that's awesome. I keep reading the Bible. I get on through Psalms. And I read so many Psalms just like this one. Get through Proverbs. I'm like, wow, that's some living right there. If you did all what Proverbs said, that'd be an incredible experience. Proverbs and Ecclesiastes. And I finally got into the big prophets like Isaiah, Jeremiah, Lamentations. But then I got into Ezekiel. I'm just going to admit right now, Ezekiel was a little tough. I ended up skipping some verses in Ezekiel. Is that okay? I came back and read them, don't worry. Daniel. Now, I'll tell you something. I'm a preacher of prophecy today, but I remember my first time reading through the book of Daniel, and it was like, whoa, like dreams and visions and future and then Nebuchadnezzar out wandering around like an animal. That was some weird stuff. And this was an experience. Then Hosea and Joel and Amos and Obadiah and Jonah and Micah and Nahum, Habakkuk, Zephaniah, Haggai, Zechariah, and then finally Malachi. And then I turned the page and it said New Testament. So, it's like a new section in my Bible. I turned the page again and it said the Gospel according to Matthew. I said, what's a gospel? It's going to be fun. I started reading Gospel, and I'll tell you something. Matthew did not start out exciting. Begot. That's where people get it tied up. You just got to read through if you can make it through the first half of the first chapter of Matthew, you'll be all right. Finally, you get down to the story of the birth of Jesus. I'm like, I know this one. This is about that baby in the barn. I got this one down. And as I'm reading the story about Jesus, I realized he grew up. He became a man. He went to the wilderness. He was tempted. By who? My old boss. And I'm like, whoa, this is the story of the Bible. I'm like, I didn't know any of these things. This is all new to me. And of course, his baptism, I forgot about that, then the wilderness, and then he got this Sermon on the Mount, which again, this was for me, it was like an epiphany, that's the word for it. Reading Matthew 5, 6, and 7, the story of the true Christian, how God wants us to live, an attitude that Christians are supposed to have. And I'm like, this is amazing, this is how to treat one another. And then it ends by talking about the foolish man, and the wise man. I'm like, I think I remember the song. Wise man built his house upon the rock. You guys know that one? But the moral of that story is those that hear and those that do. And it talks about not everybody who says, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but those that do. And I'm like, okay, I finished the Sermon on the Mount with this attitude of like, all right, I will do it. I don't want to be one of those Christians who trip over the steps. No tripping here. I didn't want to be one of those Christians that were, saying one thing and doing another. I wanted to be a real, genuine, changed person. And I didn't even say the word Christian because I didn't know what a Christian was at that point. Christian was a bad word to me. I didn't think anything good about Christians. I didn't realize Christians were followers of Christ, or at least supposed to be. That's like, whoa, that makes sense, actually. And so I skipped some slides there. Psalm 51, missed that one. But anyway, so here I am. I'm continuing studying. I'm continuing reading the Bible. Here's a picture of my cell, by the way. And it's pretty simple. Yeah, and the only thing you're missing here is the toilet. I'll tell you more about the toilet in just a moment. I don't normally tell my toilet story, except you guys gave me a little bit extra time, so I'm going to tell you my toilet story. You excited about that? But not yet. So I'm continuing reading through the story here, and I get to going through Matthew again and reading about how Jesus treated one another, treated people, and how he had compassion on people. He was healing people. He was loving people. I mean, this is Jesus. This is the Jesus I've always heard about, but never knew anything about. This is Jesus, so I'm reading more and more about Jesus and his teachings and how he would. I loved how every time he got trapped up by the Pharisees, he always got out of it and made them look foolish. And I'm like, wow, this is a cool Jesus, and I want to be like this Jesus. And so, but then I get finally to the story where Jesus is going to go to Jerusalem, and there he's he's out there praying. I mean, guy got arrested while he was praying. And Judas came up, he kissed him and all that stuff, and now I understand the whole Judas thing. And then the betrayal. But then Jesus, he doesn't fight. He surrenders. And then Jesus ends up going with them. And he's arrested. He gets beaten. He goes on trial. He didn't even answer his accusers. He's not trying to defend himself. And here's Jesus being drugged to the hill, to the place where he was crucified, where he's hung on the cross. Now you'd think, 15 years old, in those 15 years, somewhere along the line, somebody would tell me the story of Jesus dying on the cross. I mean, I knew the cross. I used to wear it upside down, one around my chest, with a knife in it. I was a weird kid. But nobody told me about Jesus. Nobody told me about the fact that he died. And frankly, I will admit, I didn't really understand why he was dying. Like, I didn't get it. Like, he's dying. And nobody's stopping him. All of his disciples are running. Even Peter's denying him. This is the Peter. This is the Peter who was like supposed to be the rock. Denying him. And there's this incredible teacher, rabbi, dying. And I'll be honest. It was hard to read that story. But when Matthew 28 came around, somebody should have told me. I had no idea he was going to rise again. He's going to come back to life. He wasn't in the tomb. He's alive. Jesus is alive. Oh, friends, I'm so glad the Bible tells the story of not just his death, but also of his resurrection. Jesus is alive. And he goes to heaven and he leaves us with this message. Go and make disciples. Go and baptize. Go, keep my commandments, he says. Teach people to keep my commandments. Now I'm reading this story and I'm like, I'm like on it. You can imagine, I'm reading like the book of Matthew in one day. All this is happening like in one day. Okay? I read the whole Bible, it was like a month to read the whole thing. And so like this, I'm reading a lot in a day. I had time on my hands. You don't feel bad about not reading the Bible that fast. But H.M.S. Richards would read the Bible. I think it was, every month. he would read the Bible through. So I'm told. I think he read anyway, won't give you the story of H.M.S. Richards, but powerful man of God. So I'm just floored by the story of Jesus. So I turn the page, and guess what's on the next page? The Gospel according to Mark. I'm like, what? What did Mark have to say, right? And I read the whole story of Jesus over again. How cool is it? It's in the Bible twice. Isn't that awesome? God would give the story twice, but Mark is kind of more like compact and right at you, and it was really cool to read the book of Mark. And I turned the page, and the Gospel according to Luke. I'm like, I started skipping through to see how many other Gospels are there, tell the story, and the Gospel according to Luke is so powerful to read Luke's, because Luke is a storyteller. Let me tell you, he just parable after parable after parable of Jesus, and I love stories, and so I'm following Jesus along, and I love that parable of the man. Remember the two sons. One of them went and wasted all his money, and he was eating the pig's food. And then what's the Bible say? He came to his senses, and he came home, and his father was waiting for him, and his arms open and threw it around him, and I'm like, yeah, that's me. Jesus wants to receive me like that. And this is just so powerful. I'm just feeling even now telling you the story, just that experience of just meeting Jesus, falling in love with Jesus. And I tell you, if you ever want to fall in love with Jesus, turn the page again to the Gospel according to John. Because John tells it so beautifully. John paints a picture of Jesus who loves us, who cares so much about us. It's John, of course, that we read the story of the man, or the woman, rather, caught in adultery, who Jesus said, neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more. Thank you, Jesus. And I read these stories one after the other, and then, of course, going through the excruciating pain of seeing Jesus once again crucified. But praise the Lord, once again resurrected. To see my Savior. I understand more about the gospel now. John makes it so clear about believing on Him, putting your faith in Him, trusting in Him. Letting Jesus, the Bible says there in John chapter 1, he says, as many as received Him, to them He became the right to become the sons of God. Friends, we need to receive Jesus. If you haven't done that yet, I beg you, please. Listen to His pleas for your heart. He wants your heart. Then I turned a page to the book of Acts, and I got to see the adventure of the early church. I'm like, I wish I was there. I wish I was with Paul. I would have preached with Paul. I would have went to prison with Paul. I would have been there. And then Romans. The brakes went on. I'm like, what just happened? I don't understand any of this. This is Romans, and I'm a 15-year-old mind, and maybe some of you younger people have a brighter mind than I did, but I was still on all my medications and all that stuff, and I'm trying to, trying to figure out, and I got some of it. Some of it was very clear, we've all sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. Yep. Some of it, the wages of sin is death. Yep. And I got some of that. But some of that stuff was even using these big old words, I understand. But I finally made it through Romans and 1st and 2nd Corinthians and all the way through to the book of Revelation, where I'm like, wow, I think I saw a documentary about this one time. And, there was 4 horsemen of the apocalypse and stuff like that. I made it through the Bible, and I'll tell you something. As I made it through that adventure, something incredible, miraculous happened to me. Just as miraculous as happened to David, Saul on the road to Damascus, it happened to me too. God called me. And somehow I said, okay, Lord. And He began to change me. My heart began to soften. And I desired the thing, talk about the heavy metal music. My dad, I got a Walkman radio, and I started listening to the Walkman radio. I'm like head banging silently because you couldn't make any noise in the cell, So I got the headphones on, and then all of a sudden I'm realizing this isn't good. And all of a sudden, this I wouldn't say all of a sudden, it was over a few weeks process. Every Friday night, this Christian heavy metal would come on the radio, this one station. I'm like, yes, I can have my heavy metal and be a Christian too. Woohoo! And that lasted for about a week. And I said, this brings my mind right back to when I used to go to these parties and do the drugs, and it's not good. But at least I had my loud Christian rock, right? That lasted for about a couple weeks. But at least I still had this beats and, this thing that makes you want to move. And I hear these hymns that would be on some of these Christian radio programs. I'd be like, oh no. There's no way I can listen to this music, right? This was the slowest, driest, most boringest music ever to my ears. And this is what's Christian music. For a few weeks. Until finally, all of a sudden, those hymns were sounding more beautiful, and those loud, obnoxious songs were sounding more obnoxious. Until finally, you'd be hard-pressed to hear me listen to anything but good Christian classical or hymn music. Why? Not because of me. I'm telling you what. I still go through like Walmart and they play some Christian, or not Christian, just play some rock song. I'm like, yeah, that's how I used to like that stuff. My flesh desires it. It does. It still calls out to it, right? Some of these old bands. Some of you maybe can relate to that. Because I listen to music. It was part of my life. But the Lord was changing me, right? And so that battle, I think the Lord's gotten the victory time and time again, because let me tell you, I don't listen to that stuff anymore. And so God has gotten the victory there in my life. Now, another miracle that happened. Now, first of all, let me tell you about the radio real quick. I'm running out of time. The radio, I began to listen to Christian radio stations. And all the different radio stations were telling me, the preachers were saying different stuff. And at first it was great because they were all saying the same thing. But as I listened closer, one was telling me about, this or that or one thing or the other. But I didn't know. I read the Bible through one time. What's that? You don't know the Bible reading it through one time. And so I'm like being pulled this direction and that. And so I got a little frustrated about all the different preachers saying different stuff. Once you're saved, you're always saved. One, you're not. And one preacher would say, the law is good. Another preacher would say the law is bad. And what? Here's a miracle. I told my mom I'm a Christian. She was so happy, by the way. She goes to the Christian bookstore. It wasn't a Christian bookstore. It was actually, it was called Hastings up in Missouri. She went there and she bought 2 books. A Bible, New King James Version. I was reading the NIV Bible before. And then, so the New King James. And then she got me a Strong's Exhaustive Concordance. Now, I asked her later, why did you get me that book? She said it was the biggest book they had. She didn't know what it was. If my son's going to become a Christian, I'm going to give him the tools, right? So she got me a Bible and Strong's Concordance. Well, those are the best things she could have ever got me because, if you don't know, a concordance is like an alphabetical Bible. You can look anything up in there. So I'm starting to read. So I'm going through here, and a preacher would preach on angels. I look up the word angels. I read every Bible verse about angels. And the preacher would preach on worship, or preach on music, or preach on the law or gospel or grace or love or whatever. And I could read every single Bible verse about any topic. I could look up and find about different people in the Bible. This was great. Plus, he had the Hebrew and the Greek in the back to help me. And I'm like, I'm going to learn Hebrew and Greek. So I started studying Hebrew and Greek. And I'm getting really excited about all this, right? And so every time a preacher would say something, I would go to the Bible and test it. Now, right before that happened, preachers would be talking about baptism. You ever heard a preacher preach on baptism? Some of these preachers on the radio, they were, you need to be baptized. And, they go on like that. And I'm not a, screaming preacher. But I knew I needed to be baptized. Because you go in the Bible, Jesus was baptized. John the Baptist did baptism. Jesus said, he that believes and is baptized will be saved. You go in the book of Acts, and, what hinders you from being baptized? Romans chapter 6, baptism, 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 baptism. I'm like, I got to get baptized. I'm a Christian. That's what Christians do. They get baptized. So as I'm sitting there, I start looking around the cell. I think to myself, nah, I'm not going to quite, you guys aren't thinking about that. I'm looking up here, guys. Come on, seriously? So I say to myself, nobody else around to do it, I'm going to do it. I take some toilet paper, I clog up the sink, I began pushing the button to fill it up. It takes like 40 times to fill up the sink, right? Finally get the sink kind of full, really quietly, almost in hushed, less than whisper tones because I didn't want to get busted. I lean my head over that sink, and I say, I baptize myself in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. I go back over to my bunk, and I kneel down, and I pray and dedicate myself to God again. And if I could only see what God saw that day, all the angels on their backs and laughter rolling around the cell. But one thing's for sure. Well, I may have done some things. I didn't know the difference. I had been to like one Catholic church where like a baby was christened, so I thought pouring water was totally cool, right? I didn't understand the whole baptism means immersion thing. That came later when I studied this book. Look up the word baptism, and all of a sudden you get it figured out. But those are some of my experiences while I was studying the Bible. I continued to learn. I continued to grow. That year I spent in the Juvenile Detention Center. I became a Christian. I learned most of the precious truths that you believe today. In fact, I began to write all the churches. and say, what do you believe? What do you believe? And they'd all write me back and say, we believe this or that. And I'm like, whoa. Well, finally the Seventh-day Adventist Church wrote me back, and they said, this is what we believe. I'm like, whoa, I believe that. I believe that. I don't have time to get into the story of how I learned about the Sabbath and learned about death and I learned about all these things just through studying the concordance and studying my Bible. And but I had a few things still yet to learn. Still do, I guess. But finally, the day came when the judge said, you know what, you're 16 now, you're old enough to stand trial as an adult, we're going to send you to county jail. So they certified me as an adult. I'm a 16-year-old adult. They sent me to county jail. They took my mug shot. That's my mug shot. What you guys laughing for? So, Samson didn't cut his hair. Nobody laughed at him. I'm just saying. No, I didn't cut my hair for a while, and so I got booked. This is the only picture taken of me between the ages of, since I got locked up in 1998 till about 2001 when I got sentenced. Anyway, so that was the only picture. So anyway, that's my fro. There's but going to jail was an interesting experience. I don't have time to tell you about my jail experience. I'm going to skip on back to prison. I wrap this up. It's Independence Day. I got to set you free sometime. It was scary. I told you going to prison, but there was a promise I learned from the Bible. It said, when a man's ways, this is Proverbs 16, verse 7, when a man's ways pleases the Lord, he makes even his enemies to be at peace with him. And you can imagine there'd be a lot of enemies in prison, right? Especially for a young person. So I pray, Lord, I don't want to get raped. I don't want to get beat up. I don't want to get killed. Please protect me. I will preach your word. I'll convert a whole prison to you. I'll work for you and preach all you want me to preach. And so I began doing that. And the Lord really, really blessed. I spent that year I spent about 10 months in county jail. I told the judge, hey, I'm a Christian. I'm guilty. Like, I'm not hiding it anymore. I'm not lying about it. Just have mercy on me. They were offering me 18 years. The prosecution was offering me 18 years as a plea bargain. And I said, you know what? I'm going to leave it up to the judge to have mercy. So I went to the judge. I said, Judge, have mercy. He said, all right, I'm going to give you 20 years. So he sentenced me to 20 years in prison. And so I spent from the age, my 16th birthday, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25. I turned 26, 27. I turned 28 in prison. I turned 29. When I turned 29 years old, right before I turned 29 years old, I saw the parole board. And the parole board said, we're going to let you out of here. I said, yes. 6 years early. So 14 years I spent locked up. And during that time, let me tell you something. God protected me. God kept me. You know how many fights I got in that entire time? 0. I was assaulted twice. But both of those turned out to be to God's glory in a very major way. You know where it says, turn the other cheek? In both cases, I turned the other cheek. And in both cases, one case, the guy didn't apologize. He just thanked me for not telling. But the other case was a Muslim who was testing my faith. And you can read my book. It's all these stories are in there. But he tested my faith, and he later came and said, you know what? You're the first Christian I've ever seen act like a Christian. It was just an incredible story there. But anyway, God protected me. Amen? I mean, I've seen the worst. I've seen people get killed in front of me. It's terrible, terrible stuff happened in prison. But God was watching out for me, and I just praise God for that. He's very good. I studied the Bible, got to know it very well. I worked in the chapel library for years, and got to know the chaplain, and we worked together for years. And he was a Baptist, but he was kind of my mentor. Is it okay to be mentored by a Baptist? And he taught me a lot of things, and just practical things about life, and he actually helped me get all these different books ordered from the ABC store. And so I stacked the whole library bookshelf full of Adventist books. And I read them all first. And so I got to know all these things, and I shared them. We had Bible studies, started a church in prison, and the church began to grow. And the Lord was really blessing inside. And then the day, of course, came when I got out of prison. Well, I got this verse I got to share with you first. It is good for, I love this, David's so wise. It is good for me that I've been afflicted that I might learn thy statutes. When you're going through a hard time, remember this verse. Maybe you're not having a hard time because of something you did bad, like me, but whatever hard time you're going through, just remember, God has a lesson for you through it. Psalm 119, verse 71. And so anyway, I got out of prison, praise the Lord, and I was determined. I'm going to find work. I'm going to do good. I'm going to do my best. I get out of prison, and I put in 40 job applications. Well, before I put in the job applications, the week went out, Sunnydale, some of you heard of Sunnydale Church up in Centralia, Missouri. That's where I went out. The church kind of adopted me when I got out. And a church member up there, they helped me get a place to stay for a month. Some of you guys may know Walt Erickson. He helped me get a car. In fact, gave me a car. And so I got a car. I got a place to stay. But I got to go look for some work. And can you imagine getting your driver's license at 29 years old for the first time in your life? That was this. And then the insurance person calls you. When did you get your license for the first time? Today. Anyway, that was kind of awkward. So but 40 job applications. Guess who wanted to hire me? Nobody. Nobody wanted to hire me. I mean, would you want to hire me? Come on. I'm a convict. I have I have a zero history of work. I've got zero. I got my GED while I was locked up. That's it. Number one applicant? I don't think so. So nobody wanted to hire me. Then I get this miraculous phone call out of the blue. I remember I was in Best Buy parking lot trying to get a job at Best Buy. And I was sitting out there in the parking lot. I get a call from this pastor I'm Pastor Neil Dye. He said, we heard that you got some Bible experience. Would you want to come knock on doors with us? I said, well, I don't have a job. So I started going around. He in the Jeff City Church. He was going around and taking the church members door to door, doing surveys and various different things. And I remember him. I could go tell me so many stories about this. But since you know Pastor Dye, I probably shouldn't tell you too many. Anyway, he began to... Anyway, he began to kind of took me under his wing. Then I get another phone call, a couple weeks later. He said, well, we've got a job opening at the Fulton Jeff City Church for a Bible worker. Are you interested? I said, absolutely. What's a Bible worker? I don't remember exactly what I said, but I'm ready to work. He said, we got a place at the church. We'll put you up in the basement. Come on up. I'm like, let's do it. And I'd been praying. I had been praying for this, so I knew this was already an answer to prayer. I didn't have to go ask God, God, that's what you want me to do. It's like, this was God saying, go do this. So I got to work with Pastor Dye and Sherry, and the church is there for about 2 years. And they sent me off to AFCO to get better training. I never came back. And the Amazing Facts wouldn't let me go. So, but that's been kind of my adventure, my story. Oh, along the way, I got to just introduce you here. This is my wife. I got to meet her. Her name's Jenny. She's just beautiful, but there's something missing from this picture. Let me just add something real quick. There you go. Me. So she finally said yes. She married me. And, of course, now we got 3 little ones. You've met and heard them. So it's purity, zealous, and simplicity. My three little ones. Let me wrap up my thoughts here, guys. I've give me the freedom. I talk too long. Some of you might be experiencing bondage, and maybe a sin. Maybe it feels like depression. Maybe it's some health problem. Whatever the bondage is that you're experiencing, you're going through. God has a way to set you free. God can set you free. Amen. He can break those bonds. He's broke them in my life. He can break them in your life. In fact, we need those bonds broke every single day. Jesus said, "If you continue in my word, then you are what? My disciples indeed, and you shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free." Now, I want you to notice this, verse 36. If the Son therefore shall make you free, you shall be free indeed. Now, I just want to give you an invitation right now. If anybody out there is experiencing any kind of bondage, any kind of heaviness, guilt, shame, anything that they need to let go of, Jesus can take it. Jesus can bear that burden. Jesus took it at the cross already, the sins. Today, He's interceding for us in the heavenly sanctuary as our high priest. Right now, ready to receive your petitions. Call out to Him. Find the freedom that you alone, that He alone can give you. If it's drugs and alcohol, if it's bad attitudes, bad words. I've had some people that say, I'm a Christian every way, but I just can't get control of my tongue. I just say these bad words all the time. God can give you victory over your tongue. God can give you victory over everything. And if you want that, if you desire that, then by all means, friend, give it to the Lord. Come to Him. Receive the invitation that He has for you. Anybody want to receive that invitation today that say, Jesus said, "Come unto me, all you who are heavy, burdened and heavy laden, and I'll give you rest." Anybody just want to say, Jesus, today, I want to give you all my burdens. Take away all my guilt. Anybody just want to raise their hand and say, today, I want to be free? Amen. Well, at this time, I think Eddie's going to lead us out in a song. If you got time for one. And